This is probably the most psychotic psychological thriller we've ever made. We figured it would be the perfect time to release it, as it is Halloween after all. So buckle up, because we're about to take you on another wild ride this Halloween. I love trick-or-treating so much. I don't care that I'm an 18-year-old man now. If anyone told me I was too old to trick-or-treat, I wouldn't listen to them. There's just no way they could ever understand how much it means to me. I live alone in a basement that I rent from some older relatives. I spend most of my days sleeping on this flimsy mattress on the floor that I barely get out of. I guess I've got low iron in my blood, or it's due to my insomnia. It's not like I'm lazy though. I'm a sanitation worker, or a janitor in layman's terms. I work hard to make a living, but at the end of the day, there isn't much in my life that makes me feel alive. That is, except for trick-or-treating. I lose sleep on the nights before Halloween, tossing and turning out of excitement. Unfortunately, since it's hard for me to save money, I don't have a lot of options for apparel. I always went as an inmate, with the old-fashioned black and white striped clothes, and I have an added perk that makes them into an awesome prisoner costume. I have those shackles and chains that I put on over my ankles and wrists. I know it might seem strange, but I'm always so excited for trick-or-treating that I always sleep in my costume. I just can't wait to chow down on those delicious treats they give out. It may not be nutritious for my body, but it's nourishment for my soul. One night, I shot up from a rare deep sleep and looked at my wristwatch, realizing that it was already 7:58 p.m., just 2 minutes shy before 8 o'clock, when the trick-or-treating officially begins. I rushed to my sink and splashed some water on my face to shake off the grogginess, threw on my sneakers and snatched my childhood candy sack, then waited at the bottom of the stairs. Just 2 more minutes. Hang in there, buddy. It won't be long now, and we'll be doing our favorite thing in the world, trick-or-treating. Just 1 more minute now. 59, 58, 57, 56. When I opened my eyes and saw that it was finally 8 o'clock, I sprinted up the stairs and ran out into the street. I rushed up to the first house that I saw and immediately started banging on their door. Within a few seconds, the homeowner answered. He was a younger man, about my age, and dressed exactly like Pennywise the Clown. It was a great costume, I tell you. Trick or treat! It's not Halloween yet, idiot! Get the hell off my property before I call the cops! He slammed the door in my face so hard that I staggered back in confusion. That encounter shook me so badly that I didn't even have the heart to try another house that night. I told myself that I'd just gotten things mixed up and should try again tomorrow night. Not at that same house again, of course. Maybe his neighbor would be nicer, I told myself, as I rocked myself to sleep, haunted by the specter of hunger. The next day, I got up at 7:59 p.m. and gave it my best shot once again. I splashed some water on my face, made sure my costume was in order and my shoes were on my feet. Then, I grabbed my old candy sack, and this time, I timed it so perfectly that I didn't have to wait for a single second. I got up to the bottom of the stairs at 8 o'clock sharp. Then, I ran up and out the house and into the street, this time turning the other direction and hitting the other next-door neighbor's house. After knocking this time, I was met by an older woman who was also dressed as Pennywise. Trick or treat!
Were you dropped on your head or something? It's not time for that yet, stupid! Now get away from my door before I tell my husband to beat the crap out of you!
I was so confused, but I hate when people yelled at me. So I went straight home, once again feeling so utterly defeated. The only thing that comforted me in bed that night was the hope that the third time would be the charm. The next day, I have to admit, I just didn't have the same gusto as before. I did the same routine, but my heart wasn't into it. I shuffled down the street and picked a different house, pathetically tapping my fingers against the door. The man who answered was an older, larger male, but for some reason he was dressed as Pennywise, just like the other two. Trick or treat. You moron! It's not time for trick-or-treating yet! Wait for Halloween like everybody else! Why? Why are you dressed like Pennywise if it isn't Halloween? Shut up! I told you it's not time yet! But I've been waiting for so long. I'm so hungry, sir. I need to eat treats or I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna make it another day.
You're such a wimp. You better go home and wait for tomorrow or I'm gonna get angry.
Can't I just have one to tide me over until then? All of a sudden, the man unhinged his jaw as he let out a guttural scream right in my face. He bared his teeth, which began to grow in size and sharpness. Then he lunged at me and snapped his jaws together, trying to bite my face off. Ah! I fell backwards and scrambled, running away as fast as I could. I shuffled back home in a deep depression, sweating with fear and anxiety. The only reason I was able to crawl back into bed and sleep until the next day is because I was so hungry from the lack of treats that I barely had energy to stay awake. I held my blanket over my face and squeezed my eyes shut, hoping this was all just some bad dream. When I woke up, things felt different. I looked at my hands and they were all wrinkly. As I got up, I limped over to the sink and looked into the mirror and was horrified by what I saw. I was a scrawny, starving old man. I tried to splash water on my face and rub my eyes, hoping that I was just seeing things, but nothing I did made that old face go away. I realized that I'd been seeing things. I wasn't some 18-year-old janitor renting out a basement. I was a helpless, diseased old man being held captive in someone's cellar. I noticed the time on my wristwatch read 7:59. With nothing else to do, I grabbed my candy sack and waited at the bottom of the stairs. At exactly 8 o'clock, I heaved my aging, decrepit body up the stairs and knocked on the door at the top of the landing. The door opened, revealing the same 3 people dressed as Pennywise that had been tormenting me this whole time. Trick or treat. They each dropped a single piece of candy into my bag.
You finally came on the correct day of the week, silly. We thought you'd never learn. Don't forget again now. Halloween is every Friday. See you next week. No!
The next story was loosely inspired by probably one of the most heinous, notorious crimes that occurred within the 20th century. We thought we'd feature an animation inspired by the deadly occurrence, as this is a Halloween video after all, and we wanted to give you guys something that will leave you creeped out this year. More details at the end of the story. When I was in my late teens, I lived with my father in this really old-timey house that had all these weird nooks and crannies. Him and I didn't really talk much. For many years, we were terribly depressed due to the sudden disappearance of my mother and little sister. My last memories of them were on Halloween night. My father was at home while my mother took my sister and I trick-or-treating. I never understood how it happened, despite replaying every second of that night in my head over and over again. One second, we were walking down the street together. Then, I ran up the steps of a porch to ring a doorbell, and when I looked back, my mother and sister were just gone. My father and I shared an immense feeling of guilt, knowing this all could have been avoided if we just went out together as a group. To make matters worse, our family's kidnappers were never caught. Him and I both used to love Halloween, but after the events of that year, things were never the same. Apparently, there was a psycho dressing up as Pennywise the Clown, and would go out on Halloween and lure his victims by offering them balloons, only to snatch them once they took the bait. I had a sneaking feeling that clown might be behind my mother and sister's disappearance. Obviously, this made everyone in town paranoid about going trick-or-treating, especially as the number of missing persons cases continued to climb year after year. Nobody wanted to end up becoming another statistic. However, despite everything, I was just a teenager, and I wanted to keep on living my life. Whenever Halloween grew near, I would try and convince my father to let me go trick-or-treating. He never even came close to it. Just the suggestion tended to make him go ballistic. Hey, Dad, can I go trick-or-treating this year?
No! You're the only one I have left! I can't risk losing you too!
I'm sorry, Dad. I won't ask again.
Yeah, you better not. Could you even imagine what that would be like if you left me completely alone in this world? All for some candy? I said I was sorry, jeez!
Unfortunately, my father's paranoia wasn't restricted to Halloween alone. I lived a majority of my childhood without friends, or any semblance of a social life. But of course, as the old adage goes, strict parents create sneaky kids. One day, just shy of Halloween, I'd had enough of my father's BS. I hatched a plan to take matters into my own hands. My father always had all sorts of renovation work to do around the house to keep himself busy since my mother wasn't around anymore. On Halloween night, while he was working on the basement, I went up to my room and put together my costume. It may seem strange, but I played off the rumors of the Pennywise kidnapper and dressed up as Georgie from the movie It. I also wore a Jason mask to conceal my face as a sort of hybrid costume. I then snuck to the foyer, making sure my father was still in the basement. I casually shut the door and vowed to be back in time before my father even noticed my disappearance. The sensation of finally breaking free and getting out of the house for once was refreshing. I saw dozens of trick-or-treaters scattered throughout the streets, just like old times. I had to shake off the memories of the night my sister and mom disappeared, but I managed to put it aside and milk the night for everything it was worth. I hit up as many houses as possible, and filled my candy sack so much that it was fit to burst. I was out for quite a few hours, but I made sure to start heading home before midnight. Of course, just when I thought I was playing it safe, that's when I saw him. He was standing on the corner just down the street from me, right underneath a flickering lamppost. A freakish creep dressed as Pennywise the Clown, holding a single red balloon. I knew right away that it had to be the kidnapper from the rumors. The smart thing to do in that moment would have been to run straight home in the other direction. But I had a deadly combination of a hunch and a grudge, which meant I had a bone to pick with this clown. I approached him slowly, neither of us breaking eye contact.
Hey you, Pennywise, what are you doing out here?
No way! It can't be! Is that Georgie with a splash of Jason I see? Why, I'm handing out free balloons to good little trick-or-treaters like you, of course. What? Did you want one too?
Hell no! I know that's a trap. I'm not stupid.
Oh, maybe not. But you're surely a coward.
What? No, I'm not.
Come on, take it. Take it. Why don't you take your mask off then? Or are you scared that old Pennywise will see your darling face?
I'm not scared. You just don't deserve to see my face, you loser.
So, you think you're a pretty boy, don't you? You're so funny. I'm funny too, you know. I've got lots of jokes. I'll show you one. You see this pretty red balloon? Imagine this balloon is your face. All of a sudden, that psycho opened his jaw naturally wide, bearing inhumanely sharp teeth. Then, he wrapped his slithering tongue around the balloon and swallowed it whole. In that moment, I realized what I'd gotten myself into. This guy didn't even appear to be human. He was like some kind of monster. Fear rushed over me, forcing me to drop my sack of candy, turn around and sprint the hell away. He started chasing me right away, and no matter how hard I ran, he was just inches behind me. I looked over my shoulder just to see that psycho's arms stretching out to grab me, like they were growing in length somehow.
Leave me alone, I'm calling the cops! Somebody, help!
Then just like that, his hands covered my mouth and eyes so I couldn't see or scream for help again. I tried to break free, but this guy was a lot stronger than he looked. He lifted me up and carried me off somewhere while I gasped for air through the small holes in the mask. I heard us enter a house and go down a set of stairs. Then, he threw me on the cold hard ground of some random basement. But it wasn't just a random basement, it was familiar. That Pennywise was standing right over me with a terrifying look on his face, like he was seconds away from ending me. I then ripped off my mask and pleaded to be spared. Suddenly, his entire demeanor changed. The bloodlust in his eyes drained away as he grabbed me by the arm and dragged me back up the stairs, then threw me on the couch. That's when I realized I was in my own house.
What the hell is wrong with you? Did you not listen to a single word I said? Why did you have to disobey me? I could have done something really bad to you.
I was shocked, in a total daze. I could barely even register what he was saying. I couldn't believe that my own father was the psychotic kidnapper from the town rumors. If you ever mention any of this to anyone, you'll be that red balloon. Do you understand?
Yes, Dad. Good! Now go to your room! You're grounded for the rest of the year!
That night, I couldn't stop myself from lying awake and connecting all the dots. Eventually, I knew I had no choice but to call the cops. They swarmed the house within the hour and busted in, arresting my dad. Afterwards, they searched the house up and down, tearing everything apart. But what sent shockwaves through the nation was when they discovered a secret compartment hidden in the basement's wine cellar. It was a tiny, squalid den filled with all the missing people from the past several years, including my own mother and sister. I guess it's no longer a mystery what he was working on down there for all those years. Here's a photograph of the quote-unquote Pennywise of the story, a man named Joseph Fritzl. There was a woman who was held captive in a concealed area of a cellar in a basement for over 24 years. The culprit in question happened to be her own father. There are many other details too disturbing to list here, but we think you get the point. The next trick-or-treat story is something completely different from the cliche trick-or-treat stories you may be accustomed to. We wanted to leave you guys horrified, so we whipped up a trick-or-treat story inspired by some disturbing camera footage that you don't want to miss out on at the end of the video. For extra effect, we recommend you watch this with the lights turned off and the volume cranked high. This happened around October of 2013. It was a cold and bleak fall with very little sunlight where I lived. The Halloween season was slowly closing in on us. At the time, I lived with my mother, or rather, she lived with me. I worked full-time in construction to keep up with the rent and pay off her medical bills, while she stayed at home and lived out her final years in the only rundown condo I could afford. A decade prior, she was diagnosed with a rare type of dementia, and ever since then, she hasn't been able to take care of herself. As her only child, and with my father having already passed away, I was the only one who could be there for her. She spent all her time on the center of the living room couch with her head hanging over the back, staring up at the ceiling with this utterly blank look in her eyes. She always had to have the lights off and the blackout curtains drawn, as she developed a severe sensitivity to light. Of course, because of that, I became accustomed to living in low light conditions. The best I could do for myself was to keep the TV on in my room and use the light coming off the screen. Otherwise, I had to use candles and make sure the flame never entered her direct line of sight. Unfortunately, with it always being so dark, I was hardly able to clean. It wasn't long before my condo looked like a dump. Frankly though, one of the worst parts of this time in my life was getting home from work every day and immediately smelling the stale urine and feces, knowing that the first thing I had to do was change my mother's dressings. It's embarrassing enough to go out and buy adult diapers, but actually dealing with them is a million times more disgusting and humiliating. Not to mention the pain of having to see somebody you love in such a pitiful state. She was completely helpless. I had to spoon feed her and bathe her and dress her. Basically, I had to do everything for her because she couldn't. It was like that couch was eating her, and the way she was always looking up at the ceiling freaked me out. Especially because sometimes I'd hear her gurgle and moan like she was trying to talk, like there was somebody up there she was looking at. One morning, I had the day off. I remember seeing my mother looking so pale, but I couldn't tell if she was being poisoned by the sunlight or if she was being starved by the darkness. I figured everyone needed some vitamin D, so I asked her, "Hey, Mom, would you be okay with me opening the blinds a little?" There was no trace of a response, not even a breath. So I pulled back the blinds just a few inches.
And that's when all hell broke loose. As soon as she realized what was going on, she started screaming. She dropped to the floor and started doing this possessed-looking pose. I immediately closed the blinds and rushed to her aid.
I'm sorry, Mom, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. I won't do it again, okay? It's okay, the light is gone now.
After that, I didn't think about opening the blinds ever again. I didn't want to be resentful of my mother, but this was all taking a very heavy toll on me. I was getting to be middle-aged, and I still hadn't found a woman I could consider marrying. There was no way I could take anyone home to the putrid pigsty I was living in, especially not with my mother decaying in the living room. But something changed one night, just a day shy before Halloween. I was watching TV in my room when I decided to get some water from the kitchen. I walked out into the hallway, guided only by the light from the TV that bounced across the halls. However, when I made it out to the living room, I was stopped in my tracks. I saw my mother sitting in her usual spot, looking up at the ceiling like normal. Except this time, there was something there. It looked like some sort of evil spirit encased in shadow. Ah! I lost it and panicked. I rushed to the window beside her and threw open the blinds. Just then, the beam of light shining from the street lamp across the street caused the dark entity to vanish into thin air. My mother was once again raving incoherently at the sudden brightness. I closed the blinds once more and consoled her.
I'm sorry, Mom. I know you didn't like that, but I had to save you. There was something there. Are you trying to say something, Mom? What is it? Please talk to me.
Let me die.
I couldn't let that happen. She was the only thing I had. I could feel my world slowly start to sink when she lost consciousness. Once she was asleep, I picked her up and put her back in her spot so she could rest. All shaken up, I drank some water and forced myself to sleep off the fright of what I'd just seen. The next day was October 31st. As I left to head to work, I remember seeing my mother still in the same position on the couch. I tried not to think about the previous night while I was working, but it was hard to forget about. When the day was done, and I finally got to go home, I remember seeing dozens of kids scattered across the streets trick-or-treating. When I got into my condo and began approaching my door, I could vaguely see that thing encased in shadow at the end of the hallway. It looked like a male figure with a dark silhouette hovering before me. Then, before I knew it, the figure shoulder-checked me to the ground. My blood ran cold. The figure then grabbed me by my leg and dragged me down the hallway at an inhuman speed.
Ah! Somebody help!
I was positive I was being dragged into hell by the Grim Reaper itself. But out of nowhere, it let me go. I got up and raced into my apartment, only to be faced with another horror. I saw my mother, sitting at her usual spot on the center of the couch. Except now, she was staring towards the door at me. She froze me with her gaze, staring at me with bloodshot eyes and a rotten smile. That's when she said the words I'll never forget. Trick or treat. Terrified, I slowly backed out of the condo and left her alone. I went straight to the office and forced the superintendent of the condo complex to sit with me and review the security footage. I had to know if I was crazy, or if my mother was somehow clairvoyant enough to see that thing. Sure enough, right there on the video was that exact demonic shadow that attacked me. The same shadow that lingered over my mother. The super was kind enough to walk me back to my home and question my mother. But unfortunately, she had already passed. I don't think I could ever see trick-or-treating the same way again, knowing that those were my mother's last words. I have since lived in complete darkness, in honor of my mother's legacy.